Other business, private member motions. Private member motion number 12 of 2017-2018, increase in mortgage withdrawal for paying off a mortgage, to be moved by the elected member for Georgetown Central.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to bring the motion standing in my name, number 12.
Please, you can move the motion.
Pardon me, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the motion reads as such. Whereas the foreclosures on Cayman homeowners continue to be a major problem for many Caymanians, and whereas the foreclosures on Cayman homeowners continue, I apologize, Mr. Speaker, there seems to be a duplication in the whereas, so I will just skip one out. And whereas the same Caymanians facing foreclosures have the necessary amounts in their pensions to pay off their mortgages, but are limited to $35,000 withdrawal by Section 52C of the Pensions Law 2012 revision. Be it therefore resolved that the Cayman Islands government considers amending Section 52C of the National Pensions Law 2012 revision to allow the amount of the withdrawal to be increased from $35,000 to up to the maximum of 100,000 Cayman Islands dollars to pay off an existing mortgage and to carry out any other legislative changes that may be necessary to give effect to this policy.
Is there a seconder to the motion? The member from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to second the motion in light of what's happening with mortgages in Cayman.
The question is that be it therefore resolved that the Cayman Islands government considers amending Section 52C of the National Pensions Law 2012 revision to allow the amount of withdrawal to be increased from $35,000 up to the maximum of 100,000 Cayman Islands dollars to pay off an existing mortgage and to carry out any other legislative changes that may be necessary to give effect to this policy. The motion is open for debate. Does the mover wish to speak thereto? The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's fair to say that most members of this House, if not all, would understand the foundation of what this motion seeks to accomplish, because it's rather straightforward. The current national pensions law allow private sector pensions in the Cayman Islands and the pension applicants to, currently under the law, allow them to withdraw 35,000 Cayman Islands dollars in order to pay off an existing mortgage. It was a piece of legislation that was brought by the fourth elected member of Georgetown. The then member was named Mr. Elio Solomon, and I think the government and that administration should be given credit for recognizing the opportunity to allow persons to reduce that burden of cost, to either one, get themselves out of the trap of potential foreclosure, or just to reduce that major cost of paying a mortgage, which is considered to be the highest cost for any home on average. And for clarity, Mr. Speaker, for the listening audience and the viewing audience, I want to read parts of the pension law in its current form and explain what opportunities are available to the people, and then explain the benefits of increasing it from 35,000 to 100,000. In the current law, Section 52C1 states, notwithstanding Section 55 and 56, but subject to the remaining provisions of this section, a person who is a Caymanian may withdraw from an account in a pension plan an amount not exceeding $35,000 required to pay off an existing mortgage on a dwelling unit in the islands so that the dwelling unit is free from any encumbrance. 52C2, a person who wishes to withdraw an amount required to pay off any existing mortgage pursuant of subsection 1 shall, subject to subsection 3, make an application to the relevant administrator in the form prescribed in the schedule. 3, an applicant under subsection 2 shall be accompanied by evidence that that person is a Caymanian. B, evidence that the applicant has legal title to the dwelling unit. And C, a copy of a letter issued by the financial institution holding the mortgage addressed to the person making the application, whether or not solely to that person, showing approval and the principle for paying off an existing mortgage and the amount to be paid off. And 4, for the avoidance of doubt, 2 or more persons who are Caymanians approved in principle by a financial institution may, in accordance with this section, withdraw the amounts required from their respective accounts in a pension plan up to the maximum of $35,000 each towards paying off an existing mortgage. So, Mr. Speaker, basically, the drafters of this legislation, which happened in your administration, Mr. Speaker, obviously realized that persons would want to use their pension plan, which is considered a savings for most, though there is some discrepancy of the interpretation of what the purpose of a pension plan is. But former legislators believed it should be allowed to help them reduce probably the highest cost that any one family would have. Mr. Speaker, unlike many other things that need to be re-examined because of increase of cost of living and all the other factors, I think it is opportune time for this Honorable House and its members to re-examine that amount of $35,000 to increase it to $100,000. And the reason I say that is, Mr. Speaker, since the downturn in the economy in 2009 and the global recession, many have acknowledged or has interpreted the markets as not to be as beneficial to their pension plans as one used to think. And, Mr. Speaker, I believe culturally, many of our people have always been the type of individuals to say, you know, I better off saving my money underneath my pillow because it's safer there, rather than having it at risk on many of these markets today, which we know, Mr. Speaker, that most of the pension plans are invested in various different schemes. Some have higher risk, some have low risk, and it's balanced according to what the law states. But, Mr. Speaker, one of the most important assets that any one person can have is their home. It's the best security, and one that I think all members of the government would want to know, that every Caymanian can have the security of saying that home is theirs and not subject to any potential seizure by a bank per se. And, Mr. Speaker, what I think the average person in the Cayman Islands believe in respect to what they see their pension is a savings. And if you were to ask an average person today if they would risk $100 to make $200 at a very high risk with a 50% chance of losing that money, as opposed to taking 5% chance of making $10 on top, I think most people would take the latter. And, Mr. Speaker, I bring reference to the global recession, and I want to refer to an article that I read in the UK but I think I would have to present it to the floor of the House for everybody to see, but I'll just reference to it. And it said that the average pension plan across the UK, and I saw a supporting article quite similar to this in the United States, but it said that the average pension plan in the UK lost close to 50% of their pension plan, or their pension contributions. And Mr. Speaker, when we go back to the importance of having a roof over your head, I think most people would agree in the Cayman Islands, they would rather know that $100,000 worth of their pension, or up to $100,000 worth of their pension, can secure a home in the event that something goes wrong, like they lose a job or what have you, that they won't have to worry about that bill anymore. Now, Mr. Speaker, for some members, or some members of this House, as well as members of the public who may be concerned about this proposal of increasing the amount from $35,000 to $100,000, some will say, well, that pension is actually there for the long term and for when you retire, as well as if you allow a person to take money out of their pension and put it into their home, what if they try to sell the home afterwards? I want to assure them that that's not possible, because in the same law, in Section 52G, it has security mechanisms in place that if you were to withdraw to pay on a house, that you cannot sell that home in any capacity until either one, you've paid off or you've recontributed exactly the same amount of money you've taken out of the pension, or until you've become at the retirement age. So there's a level of security from that perspective. And also, one of the concerns that I would like to ease the minds of those who are listening, particularly those who are employers, is by no way is this motion suggesting that employers would have to contribute any more than they already are in respect to what the law provides, which we all know is 5%. Mr. Speaker, I don't intend to stay very long on this motion, because we don't have a lot of time, and there's a lot of motions that the opposition want to bring to this honorable House. And rather than not assuming that my elected members of this House don't understand the foundation of what this motion stands for, I'm going to assume that we all do. And if there's any concerns, they can mention those and their added contributions to this motion, and I can address them there. But, Mr. Speaker, it's quite simple. We want to give the people of this country an opportunity to reduce the biggest cost that they have. I also want to highlight at this point that for the government members, in order to, if there are things that they think they're willing to do or amend in respect to this motion to let it carry, I'm willing to sit down and negotiate what those changes could be. I've reached out to the government before, and I'm still willing to do so now in respect to making alterations to the motion in order for it to carry at least a principal idea of it. Because at one stage, Mr. Speaker, because I understand that there are persons who are going to be concerned about large portions of pensions being taken out of the plans and the effects on the overall plan as a pool, one of the considerations I was going to suggest was potentially increasing the contribution amounts from once the person withdraws from the pension plan, which the law already currently has, but only has at 1%. But I hesitant and I withdrew adding that to the motion on the basis of obviously they would need some level of expertise in the analysis of what would be a fair amount in respect to the ratio of $100,000. So at this particular time, the law states that you would have to contribute an extra 1% into your pension for at least 10 years or until the amount is paid off or until you reach retirement. So if we're increasing it to $100,000, one could assume, say, okay, add 3%. But again, I say, Mr. Speaker, the reason I did not add that to this motion is because I'm not a specialist in the field of pensions and the ratios that is necessary. But if the government sees that as something they'd want to consider or are willing to have it as a clause in order to support, I'm willing to consider, because at the end of the day, though I want to give the opportunity to the people of the Cayman Islands to withdraw from this fund to help protect probably one of the most important things by way of an asset, which is a roof over your head. I am cognizant of the pension providers and their plans in that respect. So I want the members of government to know that I'm willing to do just that. But again, I say, Mr. Speaker, the motion is quite simple. This will give an opportunity for people to pay off the highest expense that they have on an average family, as well as, Mr. Speaker, this could be, and though the motion speaks to foreclosures, I think the percentage of people who would take advantage of this amendment if passed would be smaller than those who would just say, I'm going to take advantage of it just so I know I don't have to worry about the cost of a house anymore. So it's not any magic bullet, Mr. Speaker, in respect to foreclosures, because foreclosures itself is a very multifaceted problem as to the reasons why we're having foreclosures. And, Mr. Speaker, there will be other motions coming to the House in respect to foreclosures in the future, and I will dwell on them then. But for some people who are dealing with foreclosures, this can be an out clause for them as well. For example, Mr. Speaker, a person has a $350,000 mortgage, but only has $80,000 left, just lost their job, were working in a firm for quite some time, was making $5,000 a month as a legal secretary, age 47 years old, but finding difficulty to get a job again. And Mr. Speaker, we know this is a plausibility because of the Cayman Islands. Many Caymanians are saying there's a level of discrimination and their difficulty because they're Caymanian, why they can't get jobs. So this is a plausible example. Age 47 years old, but has enough money because it's been working since age 19, has enough money in their pension to pay off that home. And rather than waiting around to find another job, which could potentially take 6 months to a year for the average Caymanian to find another job, they can go ahead to the pension and say, okay, though I'm not certain when I'm going to get a job again, but let me just make sure that I have a safe roof over my house, over my head. Now, Mr. Speaker, the problem of foreclosure, one of the solutions is also preventing foreclosures, Mr. Speaker. And I think this motion and this amendment to the current law, if passed, could potentially reduce the possibilities of foreclosures, but there might be a small percentage of persons who are currently in that situation right now who could use this change in the law right away. So, Mr. Speaker, again, not going to go much further than that, and I'd be happy to respond to any concerns that any member has in respect to their contributions, that I can remedy them and give them comfort in their heart that this is a good motion and that the people of the country would benefit. I think it's important to say before I go, I reached out to the pension providers to get the feedback on this motion before I brought it to the House, and to explain to them my intention with this motion and why I think it was important to be passed. It would also give them an opportunity to express their concerns and have them considered in respect to my motion bringing it forward. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, even though I was promised an opportunity to have such dialogue, I never heard back from the representative of the providers here. Collectively, they have one representative who was organizing an opportunity for me to speak to them about my motion. Because sometimes, though, Mr. Speaker, I am a representative of the people of the Cayman Islands, particularly that of Georgetown Central. I am not a specialist in pensions, so one would have to use their own interpretation, and I have had some attorneys look at my proposal, and we've seen where there's possibilities that some pension providers will say, no, I don't like that. But of course, no pension provider or administrator would want any monies out of their pool to be taken out. But we have to balance that pool reduction with the opportunity of protection of homes in the Cayman Islands for Caymanians. And I say, Mr. Speaker, though there might be minor ripples in respect to the pension pool, in respect to the ripple or the wave that it would help Caymanians is definitely more in favor of our country as a whole if this motion is passed. But I just want to highlight that I've given the stakeholders involved an opportunity to speak about it and give me their concerns before me bringing the motion, and that would be the mature and respectful thing to do. But they chose not to write back or to carry out that meeting so I can hear their concerns. So they've had the opportunity to have them heard. But Mr. Speaker, I know this motion was before the House in the last sitting, and I know that the government would have had the opportunity to consider the motion and its merits and what the foundation of it is, and took it to their caucus and analyzed it and possibly had some feedback from their professionals as well to make a decision. So one would say that the providers or the administrators and their representatives and their firms probably will be represented in the vote today. So that being said, Mr. Speaker, I'd give other members an opportunity to contribute to this motion that seeks to increase the withdrawal amounts to pay off persons' homes from $35,000 to $100,000. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know, although others who are younger than I may not know, that you were one of the principal architects of the initiative for the establishment of a national pension scheme, as was the leader of the opposition. When finally, against all sorts of opposition, in 1996, the law was passed, we wound up with the national pensions law that we have, which has had a few, but not a great deal, of amendments to it. The reason why you felt, as did many others, that this was necessary was because the number of Caymanians in the workplace continued to grow. The number of Caymanians down the line who would need the ability to look after themselves in modern-day Cayman was also growing, and those with vision understood that if a means wasn't found to allow them to have a reliable source of income once they cease to work, the burden on government would continue to grow. This pension scheme has only been in place for 22 years, and there are many people who have now retired who would only have seen very little benefit of that scheme because they would have only participated in it for a relatively small percentage of their working lives. The days when older folk could depend on their children to look after them in their old age, Mr. Speaker, are largely behind us. The pension plan or the pension scheme that is in place under the National Pensions Law still, in my view, has a ways to go. We need to continue to make changes to it. We need to increase the level of contribution that both the employee and the employer are required to make. We need to revise the investment scheme and to allow the pension providers greater latitude in terms of the kinds of investments that they can put the money in. If we look at a comparison between the National Pensions Scheme returns and those from the Public Service Pension Scheme, it's night and day. And I think in large part it has to do with the kind of investments into which the funds in the Public Service Pension Scheme are made. Mr. Speaker, the number of Caymanians on permanent financial assistance because they don't have the income to look after themselves continues to grow every year. When I look down the road at what the Cayman Islands government is going, in my view, to wind up having to pay just to keep the wolf from the door of Caymanians who will leave the workforce over the next 10, 15 years, I am scared. Because even with this pension scheme that is currently in place, they won't, most of them, have anywhere near enough money to just pay the daily, weekly outgoings, the cost of living. So who is going to look after these people? Our people. If they don't have pensions. Even with the pensions, many of them will not have anywhere near enough and will need to be topped up by some means or another just to survive. Mr. Speaker, even as generous as the public service pension scheme is, we have had to take steps. Thank you. We have had to take steps just this year to increase what government pays to 300 plus former civil servants whose pensions were less than what we were affording persons who were receiving poor relief. They have gotten their first increased check this month, 300 plus. That is including what they were previously receiving. That is the grand sum of $650 a month. Mr. Speaker, the point I am making is that the member who moved this motion seeking to increase what is available to a person in a pension scheme, because they're not a pensioner yet, a participant in a national pensions scheme, or schemes in the various national pension schemes. Thank you, Mr. Leader of the Opposition. In certain limited circumstances, from 35,000 to 100,000, has only presented one side of the issue. Because what he's seeking to do, Mr. Speaker, is laudable, to help people pay off their mortgages. But, Mr. Speaker, it simply is not viable. I have done a little arithmetic. The scheme has only been in place for 22 years, so the 47-year-old that he referred to would have spent a number of those years of her working life without any in a scheme, at least no national pension scheme in which to participate. It's only been around 22 years. But you would have to be earning close to $60,000 a year for each of 18 years and contributing close to $6,000 a month to even have $100,000 in your pension scheme to start with. To start with. And so, Mr. Speaker, we run the real risk of wiping out the entire pension of many people if this number gets raised to 100,000. Because, you know, Mr. Speaker, even after you pay off the mortgage, that's a big relief. I am looking forward to the day that I do so. But there are still the other outgoings to keep the wolf from the door and to put food on the table and to keep the lights on. And that is the aspect of this that the member from Georgetown Central has not even attempted so far to address. How and who is going to look after people who are no longer working and who have no other source of income because their pension has been wiped out or reduced to numbers which make it completely inadequate? Mr. Speaker, last year we had 940 persons in receipt of benefits under poor relief. $7.4 million. This year we have budgeted $8.5 million. Because poor relief has gone from 550 to 650. This is permanent financial assistance. And it's going to 750 next year. So we've budgeted $8.5 million for next year. My point, Mr. Speaker, and the government is not at all insensitive to the concerns which the member raised about foreclosures, the impact, and the benefit of paying off your mortgage. The truth is, nothing he said is wrong in that regard. But the response and the view that somehow pensions can be treated as though it were a savings account that you can access whenever you wish. is where the government and the member part ways. The whole point of a pension scheme was and is and will always be to provide an income for persons when they are no longer able to work. There are a number of exceptional circumstances that are carved out so that people can access it to help themselves in cases of real emergency. Which is why the $35,000 was in there. And that took, Mr. Speaker, as you know, a great deal of debate, huge amounts of concern, and very careful thinking and drafting to make it restrictive. It was also supposed to be paid back. All indications are few, if any, people have ever paid back any of the amounts that have been taken out of their pensions fund, because the truth is they can't afford to. They're already having money taken out if they're still working at, I think it's 6%. So for them to find more out of what they're earning to put in there, except for those who are much better off, it's just not likely it will ever occur. It's not so bad if people are young, because they have a longer time to make this up. But if the 47 or 50-year-old takes $100,000 out of their account, that's pretty much it. There won't be a great deal in there unless they have some windfall and get some great job by the time they reach retirement age. And so, Mr. Speaker, the government simply cannot accept the increase proposed by the member in his motion. It would be grossly irresponsible for the government to do so. We are essentially given a license to most of the people who would exercise this opportunity to wipe out their pensions account. And my question to the member is, and then what? His motion should have come with an additional clause which said that government should now put aside X million of dollars to look after these people once they reach retirement age, because he knows, and we all know, that it is unlikely they will have the means to look after themselves when they are no longer able to work. And Mr. Speaker, as a sort of additional point, which is not in response to anything the member said, but just for general edification, the reason why the provision in section 52, I believe it is, 52C, is in the terms that it is, and I was in the House at the time that this came in, is that you're only allowed access to the $35,000 to pay off an existing mortgage, so that the dwelling unit is free of any encumbrance. Was to avoid what we know has happened in previous instances where government has offered assistance through the Cayman Islands Development Bank, where you allow money to be used to help somebody who is in arrears, and they alleviate the problem for the time being, and then subsequently fall in arrears. And now not only is the property, is the home gone, but the additional money which was used to temporarily stave off the foreclosure is lost as well. And so to avoid that circumstance, this was drafted in terms that you can only have access to the money if it is to pay off the loan, and it doesn't have any other encumbrance, because at least it'll be safe. So, Mr. Speaker, the member was not listening to what I said. I said this was not addressing any point he made. I was making this point by way of general edification for other people who may not be aware of what the terms of the section said and the reason behind the restrictive way in which the $35,000 is available. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I said, we believe that what the member is seeking to do, to assist, is a laudable objective. But we believe this is absolutely the wrong way to go about it, and is, while it may seem in the very short term to aid certain people, in the longer term, and if we all live long enough, there will be a longer term, it is going to put those who utilize it at a huge disadvantage. And it will also inevitably significantly increase the amount of financial assistance that the government of the Cayman Islands is required to pay just to allow people to live with some sense of dignity in their latter years. And so, Mr. Speaker, we can't accept the motion in its current terms. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that the member and the broader public understand, have been able to follow what I said and the rationale for us not being able to do so. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The member for Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to make my contribution to the private member's motion presently before the House, raised by the member from Georgetown Central, and to also lend, I think, support, having just heard what the Premier had to say on the subject, to the government's position. First of all, yesterday I was accused of reading my presentation, and I believe I don't hold that as a personal slight. As a matter of fact, I believe, as I stated yesterday, it was intended for my own edification and elevation. So I certainly do appreciate it. That's how it was received. Correct. So I accepted yesterday's rebuttal as an opportunity to only improve myself. So today, I'm going to make the attempt at not the paperless contribution, but I will use the paper so that I don't get lost in the process. But the reason I write things down is simply that. I was accused once upon a time in high school by a speech teacher who said to me that, Austin, one of these days you will make a fantastic public speaker. But your problem is your brain moves faster than your mouth can deliver, and oftentimes you fumble and stumble your way through that presentation. So I learned a long time ago that write it down helps keep you on track. Yeah, stick around. A lot more to see here. Certainly I want to begin, as the Premier, I think, concluded, by commending the member from Georgetown Central for raising this important private member's motion, because it reminds us that the mortgage crisis that we started to experience in this country during our periods of austerity haven't gone away with the otherwise depressed economic circumstances as a country. It's not a glooming, major, threatening issue as it once was in previous years, and steps have been taken to obviously address that, but it is far from gone. And therefore, the persons facing the risk of losing their homes is still very real. And as a government, I want to state that we are not ignorant to that fact and have had many discussions around our own caucus as to what can we do, what can be done to address this concern that are causing Caymanians to lose fundamentally their piece of the rock. So it is a real concern, and again, I commend the member from Georgetown Central for bringing it. However, and I say this with the greatest of respect, it is not very well thought out as a private member's motion. I disagree with this private member's motion to allow a withdrawal from your pensions account to save a mortgage for the same reason that I opposed it when it was first introduced by a previous Georgetown MLA. The reason why this country 22 years ago had the foresight to implement a national pension scheme was to ensure that, well, not a national pension scheme. The reason why we made pension requirements required by law, mandatory, I believe is the word I oftentimes hear in this legislative assembly. The reason why we put it in place in the first place was, as the Premier alluded, as our working population started to grow, and the future outlook was for that working population to continue to grow, we asked ourselves the question as a government, what are those persons, those Caymanians, thinking they are going to do when they get, I think in the words of the Premier, later down the road? What are they going to do with life after retirement? Those persons who hadn't begun to think about how they were going to sustain themselves, their families, their retirement golden years. Those who fail to make a plan are very likely to become burdens of society and the state later down the road. And again, the Premier alluded to the current state of affairs in terms of permanent financial relief. He didn't allude to the temporary financial relief and the other challenges that the Needs Assessment Unit faces on a day-to-day basis. And as Councillor for NAU, believe me when I tell you, those issues are far broader than just perhaps the mortgage crisis. We may have escaped a mortgage crisis, but we have still other ancillary issues that we as a government are tackling and trying to deal with. But the issues are real. But the problem I have with this motion, as I did with the motion when it was first presented in this Honourable House, is that we are merely delaying the pain for our own people. We are offering them short-term gain and trading it off for long-term pain. How many of these persons who are now being afforded the opportunity to withdraw from this otherwise forced savings account, which nobody had prior to 22 years ago, they take as much as $35,000 from it? What is the cause and effect of that action 10, 15, 20 years down the road when that same person is now ready to retire? Legitimate question, and one that I think in many respects has not been fully appreciated for what it is. I think a more interesting exercise for this House to engage upon, Mr. Speaker, would be determining of those persons who were previously allowed to withdraw up to $35,000 from their mortgage to save their mortgage, to pay off a mortgage. One, how many of those people still have those homes for the reasons as elucidated by the Premier? Paying off your mortgage, yes, it is a heavy burden lifted, but it is not the end of the road in terms of the bills that are attached to that home. Keeping a roof over the head, maintenance and repairs. Let's not forget your annual insurance, which in some cases might as well be a mortgage payment. And the other ancillary expenses with living, the cost of living. How many of those persons who made that initial withdrawal of $35,000 from a pension account, that because of the length of time, 22 years it's been in total existence, whenever they made the withdrawal, that fund was very much in its infancy. How many of those who made that initial $35,000 withdrawal still have those homes today? The second question that would be, I think, an interesting exercise, Mr. Speaker, for this House to engage in, would be of those people who made the initial withdrawal of $35,000 from their pension to save their mortgage, how many of them have repaid to those pension funds that $35,000 they withdrew? Because that too is also in the law, and it's something that isn't widely discussed. I don't have the law in front of me, but otherwise I would read it to you. But when it was first moved by the member from Georgetown, 2009 to whenever the years was, 2013, it was stated that persons were able to withdraw $35,000 to pay off an existing mortgage with the proviso that prior to retirement, they would refund that pension scheme the value of that withdrawal. Nobody talks about that because on the street is, boy, I won't be able to draw from my pension so I can save my mortgage. But nobody acknowledges that there is a requirement on the other side of that deal to pay it back. So the interesting exercise that I would be certainly curious in knowing would be, A, how many persons who made that withdrawal still have their homes that they saved? And B, how many persons actually made a repayment to that pension fund of $35,000? That would be, I think, very useful in terms of information that the House could use, and certainly the government could use, Mr. Speaker, in formulating meaningful policy that again can go towards helping people. This exercise of pensions is about your government, and I applaud those who came before me 22 years ago for having the vision and foresight to put this in place, because that to me is what government is here to do. We're here to look out for the best interests of those persons who elect us to this high office. Sometimes that means not doing that which is popular, but looking out for you in spite of you. The Premier also raised another valuable point in his contribution, Mr. Speaker, to the private member's motion raised by the member from Georgetown Central. And that is, by increasing the allowable pension withdrawal from $35,000 to $100,000, and I think I understand the basis behind, or the motivation rather, behind the member from Georgetown's thinking of the increase to begin with. I would imagine the number is rather small of the number of persons who have less than $35,000 left to go on their mortgage before they can repay it. But perhaps a more reasonable sum is within the $50,000 to $60,000, maybe even $75,000 range. And then that would obviously benefit those persons. I understand it. I know where you're going. No, there's no mask. However, the point that the Premier made cannot be lost. And whilst he did the arithmetic, I will do just the quick summary, the highlight notes. How many people today actually have the comfort of saying they got $100,000 in their pension retirement account? In general, who has a spare $100,000 lying around in their pension account right now to say, yeah, I can take $100,000 there and pay off that and I'm good? with the full acknowledgement that I'm so well off that I'm confident that I can repay that $100,000 before I retire and still have a retirement plan at the end of the day. Now, if you believe that, then I want to sell you some beautiful beachfront property. The reality is that is wishful thinking, but it's not reality. It doesn't mimic reality. And certainly as a mover of the motion may seek to use it as a potential reason to support his motion, I believe if he, again, would honestly do his homework in the long term, he would see that it's just simply not reality. It's simply not reality. Caught myself. No way I've caught myself. The issue of firsthand, how many people have $100,000 in their pension account to withdraw in order to save their mortgage is one. But the overarching issue is if they do have $100,000 in their pension account to make the withdrawal, that's all they have. And that will mean that pension fund that started whether they were 18 or within the last 22 years is now gone. What happens at retirement? Will they be able to sustain themselves and their family expenses with no pension plan whatsoever, with no planned savings whatsoever? I would argue, Mr. Speaker, that, and again, we talked about it yesterday when we looked at the population labor demographics, and in particular how they relate to work permits. The biggest category of work permits, give or take 15,000, is in the trades and vocational jobs. 30%, therefore, are in the executive and professional level jobs. I think if we were to extrapolate those labor statistics to this question, then I would say safely, and it would be an assumption, that maybe 30% of the people who were to take advantage of the proposal raised by the member from Georgetown Central probably could make it work, make it to retirement, have a plan, and be able to look after themselves at the end of that retirement. But that leaves the 70% or majority percent of people who would otherwise take advantage of this hypothetical proposal, should we grant it, who would not be in the same lofty position. That 70% would almost entirely be burdens on the state to provide for in their retirement. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, as commendable the private member motion is, and real in terms of the issue that it is seeking to remedy, it is not well thought out in the long game. And that long game simply means that we put pensions in place so that we can ensure people are looked after when they retire, even against their will. The caveat is you can't touch it until you're ready for retirement. And that's the other issue. We make it far too easy for persons to reach into that pensions account. If it is not mortgage, it's something else. That is where we lose sight of what it was this honorable House were courageous enough to embark on in the first place 22 years ago. Fulfilling the objective, which is, I believe, in my 1 year in office, the reason we are here is to look after the best interest of the people who elected us. And sometimes that means looking after their best interest in spite of them. They don't have to see it. We just have to know it. And one day, maybe they'll thank us. Probably not, because the other thing I've learned is that, politics is a thankless thing. I was a good man a year ago. Now I'm corrupt and can't be trusted and otherwise. But I accept it for what it is. I hope to change that, otherwise general opinion. But I have to agree with the Premier's and the government's position. We'd have to reject, I would reject that motion. And again, I reject it on the same reason as I did when it was first moved. And the only difference now versus then is I made my objections known using a similar microphone, but albeit not in the Honorable House. Now I, again, continue to be grateful to Almighty God, and in particular the people of Prospect, for allowing me this privilege to make a meaningful contribution and like those who came before me, those who are still here, those on either side of the aisle that I believe firmly, regardless of what they may say or do in this House, their heart is pure in the sense that they too are looking out for the best interest of the people who put them here. So that is why I believe it is the greatest privilege to have this job, and the only difference now versus then is I get to make these objections or contributions here from the floor of this Legislative Assembly. So I do not support the private member's motion. I will not support it when the vote comes, but those are the reasons why. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other member wish to speak? The member from Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really didn't plan on speaking on this motion, but I think after listening to the contributions of the other colleagues in this House, I feel compelled to actually say something on it. We are taught, Mr. Speaker, that the three basic things in life that people need are food, clothing, and shelter. Food, clothing, and shelter. I stand considering that just last week alone, one of my constituents was evicted from his house, and one of the things he was hoping to get was access to his pension that would hopefully save him. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. But what I can say is what happened is this, that the government is now paying for the family, and what I can also say is that what the government is paying per month is actually more than what his mortgage payment was. What I can also say, Mr. Speaker, is I can't discount what the Premier and the member from Prospect said, because I can tell you when even the member from Georgetown Central called me to support this motion, I had my own reservations, because at the end of the day, I held the view that while this may seem like a solution, it is temporary and it does not address the overall problem that we have. But nonetheless, at least I see where he is trying. And for that, I have to commend him, the member for Georgetown Central. What I can say, Mr. Speaker, is when you look at people's salary, if a person starts working at 16 and retires at 65, and which would be 49 years of working, and over that period of 49 years makes an average salary of $40,000 per year, his total earnings would be $1,960,000. Let's call that $2 million. That's an easy mathematical sake. Seeing that some of that money would have been invested, and the stock market is performing so very well, that $2 million would have become $3 million over the space of his 49 years working, which in essence, a 10% pension contribution, that is $300,000 total dollars at the end of 49 years. If you were to take that $300,000 and divide it by the age in which a person starts working, 65, and then you consider that the average person is probably dying at 82, that $300,000 would have to save him for 17 years, which works out to roughly 17,000, just under 18,000 per year, and just under $1,500 per month in pension. Of course, I'm being very generous in assuming that this $2 million has become $3 million, and he can get $1,500 a month as a pension. From that $1,500, he has to pay for his light, he has to pay for his water, he has to pay for his grocery. But at that age, Mr. Speaker, he has a bigger problem to worry about. He has to be worried about his health. During the budget process last year, I think when the CEO for Cineco was here, he said that the true cost of a senior citizen was roughly around $1,400, $1,500 per month. in terms of cynical, and at that point we realized that the actual civil servants were actually subsidizing the people within the private sector for when they retire and they become cynical and paying $300 a month, where the government is taking up that bill. So we do have a problem, Mr. Speaker, and the truth of the fact is, the pension itself isn't a solution. But it would be better and cheaper for the government in the long run if the person has a house that is paid off for, and the most the government has to help them with is utilities, as opposed to when they retire and have no house, and the government has to pay rent in addition to everything else that they have to pay. Because it does not change the fact that the people need shelter today, and they will need it tomorrow. So the question is, which pain do you want? Do you want to pay the rent and the utilities? Or do you just want the government to pay utilities alone when the person has nothing? It still will be cheaper. So, but at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, at first I said to the member from Georgetown Central, I would support his bill, just to allow him at least to get the discussion started, because this is still an issue that we in this honorable house will have to deal with. We do need a proper mortgage law in this country. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about that. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, coming from a banking background, I'm also cognizant of the challenges within the banking industry. And also at the same time, recognize that in the 90s and early 2000s, when many of these mortgages were issued, that the banks did 100%, 95% financing, and the banks themselves should have known then that if a person is working for 10, 15 years and could not come up with a deposit after 10, 15 years, it means that that person himself was already at risk the minute that the mortgage was issued, and that that person would have been living from paycheck to paycheck. So the bank themselves is not at blame. That's the reason, Mr. Speaker, I've always held the view that I would prefer to put it on the banks, who are also irresponsible in lending some of the money that they did, because at the end of the day, guess what? When the person is in that house, they're the bank's problem. We're not on the street. It becomes our problem. So the question is, where do we want the problem to be? But at the end of the day, you can't have banks sitting down at the same time making irresponsible loans, and then at the same time create a problem for society. Another issue I want to touch on, Mr. Speaker, is the whole issue of the pension itself. Unfortunately, this honorable house have not gotten a full pension report to see exactly what is happening within the pension industry for more than 10 years or thereabouts, for us to really have this conversation in terms of what we're doing at pension. Yep, it is required by law. And that is another issue that we need to look at, Mr. Speaker. So I can understand the situation where some people may need access to their fund because they may see it that way. And like I said, it ultimately absolves the bank of their own responsibility and leave the government to deal with it. But we also have a social responsibility in this country to make sure that people have a roof over their head, food on their table, especially where kids are involved. Mr. Speaker, the pension industry have also lost a lot of money in recent times. And the one caveat or the one silver lining I can say in this situation, and here's what I want you to think about. We've already seen 2 rate increases this year on mortgages, and they're expected 2 more increases. If you are paying 5, 6, 7% interest on your mortgage, and you have a pension that is not paying, basically staying flat or barely making any money, you're better off taking that money and paying off a loan that is attracting 6, 7, 8% interest, as opposed to a pension that's attracting basically barely 1, 2%. So that's another issue we need to consider. Now, the part of the law which the member for Prospect raised, and I have to agree with him, what we do have a problem in this country with, Mr. Speaker, is enforcing the law. Because at the end of the day, if a person has been allowed to pay off their mortgage, it means then that the monthly spend that they had before would have been eased up and they should be able to pay that money back. So even if they're not paying it towards the mortgage, even if they're paying back 50, 60% of what it is that they were paying for mortgage, they will still be better off. So the issue is not with the law. The issue has been with the enforcement of the law. We should have been insisting that those people pay it off, because if a person has a monthly commitment of $1,400 a month and they are now able to pay it off, even if they pay back $700 in additional pension, they'll still be better off. But you can't, the problem that we have is that they pay it off, and in some cases they take the money and splurge. And that's one of the things, Mr. Speaker, that we need to deal with in this country. And it's an uncomfortable conversation to have with people. But a lot of people in this country also need to take responsibility for their own personal finances. Yeah. I can tell you from banking, the minute someone called me and they say they can't pay this or they can't pay that, I can tell you what I used to do, Mr. Speaker. I go look at their credit cards. I see where they go. In Cayman Airways, tickets to Miami Arena, their concerts, they're getting their hair done, spa treatments, but you can't pay a mortgage. Come now. The question for us, there will always be the exception to the rule, Mr. Speaker. But then at the end of the day, there will be some good, abiding people that need that break. And we in this body, and that's why even though we have laws, we have regulations to go with those laws. And the regulations is normally where you find the enforcement section. And what we need to do is find out, and I would love to know also, for those people who took that $35,000 and pay off their mortgage, did they go back and take out a second loan? Did they go back and take equity out of their house? But that's the thing, we don't know. So this is really where the enforcement issue comes in. How much of them have paid it back?
Honorable member, you have much longer to go.
No, Mr. Speaker, just wrapping up. As you can see, I just, I
we have reached the hour of 4:30. Honorable Premier.
Yeah, sorry.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2 in order that the business of the House may continue beyond the hour of interruption.
Question is that Standing Order 10-2 be suspended in order for the House to continue after the hour of 4:30. All those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Honorable member, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for the reminder too, because I realize sometimes when you have notes or in front of you, you can just kind of ramble on sometimes. But Mr. Speaker, yeah, that's all right. I have no problem with that. But Mr. Speaker, just in closing, and like I said, I can tell you, the day when the member Georgetown Central called me, and I can tell you, if I could be honest, I'd shot the idea down off the bat. Because I did say to him at the end of the day that this issue isn't the solution. It's it doesn't fix the problem that we have. And it is a systematic problem. But when I do consider, like I said, the pension isn't giving people much return. And if they're paying 5, 6, 7, and especially interest rates going up, and if you can take the pension money and pay off a loan that you don't have to pay interest on, you'll be much better off. Because if you wanted something really scary, Mr. Speaker, go and take a $200,000 loan, go on any website, do an amortization table, and see if you borrow $300,000-400,000 over 20, 25 years and see how much you would have paid back. It will actually frighten you. And I can tell you from where I'm coming from. So I don't think that this is more for the irresponsible people, and I would not be party to any legislation that I think will support anyone bad behavior or irresponsible behavior, because we do have those people in society. But at the same time, that's why we have the regulations. And what I would ask the government to consider, while the motion in its present form as presented isn't perfect, and I think the 100,000 was a little bit too high. I think what the number should have been was 50,000, and then hopeful that at least a couple would have been able to access 100,000. I think that in itself, allowing at least a couple to have that, but then at the same time, say to the say to the pension provider, and also to the government who monitors pension, that we have a little asterisk beside these people to make sure, one, that they're paying back what they're supposed to be doing. Because to sit here in this house and to make decisions and not have the information isn't the right way in which to make decisions. And there's still a lot of unanswered questions with regards to how the current law has, if the current law has worked. We don't have that information. And if we did have that information, it would have been much easier to make a decision and in terms of whether we should or shouldn't support the motion. What I would encourage the government bench to do, seeing that they do have access to the information, is at least reach out and try to provide to this honorable house those that have taken advantage of it, how it is that they have performed, and then we can probably see how we can move forward from there. But for right now, I do understand the spirit of what the member of Georgetown Central is trying to achieve, and like I said, ultimately does not fix the problem, but I'm thinking more from young professional couples who would have probably accumulated such pension, and if they could go and pay off their mortgage and save themselves the interest expense that would have come with it, the family would have been better off, and at least have the decency to pay back what it is that they borrowed. In countries like Canada, I believe they have up to 10 years in which to pay back whatever it is that they took out. So I think that is one of the things that we should look at, but should just dismiss it because you have this unanswered question and that answered question. I can tell you, for the person who's worried about losing their house today, the last thing on their mind is their retirement tomorrow. All they're thinking about is a roof over their head and what it is that they need for their kids. So, like I said, I have my own questions with it, but at least it brought this topic back up for us to discuss, and at least hopefully by the next sitting of this house, we can have something a little bit more concrete to take to the people to say, you know what, this is a possible solution. Equally so, Mr. Speaker, I just want to put for the record that 2018 makes 10 years since the financial crisis. And if you look at most of the rules and regulations that are coming in, a lot of the hard ones were put to the back of the, kick the can way down the road. And in this case, a lot of them was pushed down 10 years. There are two that are on the horizon that will be giving banks the challenges. And that's the reason why I've always been a little bit cautious in terms of treading, because at the same time, Mr. Speaker, while it's quick for us to vilify banks, we also need to recognize that any society, in order to progress, need access to credit. And we have to factor in this house what the greater good looks like. Because on average, we may lose maybe 30, 40 homes a year, but we also do issue 300, 400 mortgages a year also. So it's also a matter of finding that balance. But we need to find a way to protect people's equity, because when people have worked 10, 15, 20 years to pay their mortgage, and then all of a sudden, 3 bad months out of that period, you get a nasty letter from a lawyer, and literally your entire life saving is at risk, I think that also is something that we need to look at. So, Mr. Speaker, I will just add that, and with that, I will sit down. And thank you all.
Does any other member wish to speak? The member from Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be very brief as well, because while I hadn't really planned to say much on this motion, I do want to make a few points. And I think that the rationale behind bringing this forward, raising this issue, is something that, because of his experience, he's a new legislator, he's a new representative, and I'm sure he has experienced what we've all experienced, Mr. Speaker, which is having to deal with constituents who are going through these issues. And we've heard a lot of discussions about mortgages and mortgage reform and offering some protection to the mortgagees. However, you know, in light of all this, Mr. Speaker, I think there's some good in bringing this issue up so that we can discuss it here. Parliament is supreme, and Parliament is where we're supposed to resolve these issues. And I do commend the member from Central, Georgetown Central, for raising this issue, because it's been on the lips of a great many Caymanians for quite some time now. And I'm not going to stand here today, Mr. Speaker, and say that I know what the answers are, because I don't. But I think we need to look at possible solutions. I know the Premier has done a good job in detailing the pitfalls, the dangers, and so did the member from Prospect, Mr. Speaker. And I remember my time being with the government, and us having those conversations, and we went pretty deep into the reasons why motions like this can be dangerous because of the potential harm they could cause to the pension funds. And in the long run, Mr. Speaker, the harm that can be done to the person who has taken advantage of the opportunity to withdraw from their pension. But on the other hand, Mr. Speaker, I think about all those people who've come to me and discussed with me the issues they're facing now with the potential of losing their homes. And it goes back to, for some of them, to making that choice between, do I reduce my pension and worry about the shortfall later and save my home? At least when I retire, I'll have a home to retire in. And people are now being put in that situation because they come to me and they ask me, do I think they can get money from their pension to actually pay off their mortgage? I agree with Mr. Speaker, I agree with the government that we have to be careful how we approach this, and maybe $100,000 is too much. But I am aware, Mr. Speaker, that there are many, many people out there who haven't reached the point of foreclosure. However, they're finding themselves stuck. And I'll go into a little bit into why I find that they're being caught out. We've not so long ago come through a global recession, Mr. Speaker. Many people in this country were affected by it. Some lost jobs, or in order to keep their jobs, they had to accept a lower pay. They had to be downgraded. Some were made redundant and went out and found other lines of work, not their primary line of work, but something to pay the bills. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, their mortgages were calculated based on their pre-recession salary. So what has happened to them now is that at a lower level of income, they can no longer afford their mortgages. Now, Mr. Speaker, the average mortgagee would then probably go to the bank and say, can we refinance? I need longer terms. Bring my payment down because I can't afford this payment. Unfortunately, when they reach that point, Mr. Speaker, they're already in arrears, most likely. Most people will wait 2-3 months before they actually approach the bank because they're trying to find a way out of the situation. They're trying to struggle and scrape and save and see if there's a way they can save their home without going to the bank and begging. Unfortunately, at the point, it's too late. There are already 3 mortgage payments in arrears. And I was thinking maybe instead of us approving the withdrawal of $100,000, what is stopping most of those people, Mr. Speaker, from being able to save their homes is that the bank won't refinance if you're in arrears. So maybe if they could withdraw just enough to cover that arrears, then that would be the saving act to save their home. Because then the bank would probably look at refinancing. But I know many people have come to me, Mr. Speaker, and asked me for advice. I have told them that the bank is never going to refinance you once you're in arrears. So maybe that is one way of dealing with the issue. But you know, I hear a lot of, I actually was reading a CNS story yesterday, I think it was last night, on this topic. And I see a lot of comments out there about people who have fallen into arrears. And the sort of standard comment that's being made, Mr. Speaker, is pay your bills. Yes, that's good sound advice, but we have to look a bit deeper than that. I don't think that the number of people that we're seeing getting into problems with mortgages are getting into that problem simply because they're being irresponsible. There is a deeper cause. That is where we need to look. I won't anticipate my motion that's coming up, but I plan to discuss some of that in my motion later on this evening, Mr. Speaker. But there's another way that we could probably address this, and I'll ask the House to bear with me because I haven't done the research, but it's something that I think is worth discussing as well, Mr. Speaker, is we send majority of our pension funds, I think all of our pension funds overseas. We have close to $1 billion invested. Why don't we bring a portion of that back to these islands and ensure that that money can be used locally to provide fixed rate mortgages? That would be a way of, I think, giving a higher rate of return on your pension, because from what I'm seeing on pension statements, we're still getting losses, we're not getting huge gains. But it would be an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, for us to invest our pension money here and help our economy. Because what is happening now, that pension money is going overseas and it's helping another economy, not ours. So that is another way of looking at this. We could potentially not bring all of the pension funds back here, but a portion, and administer that through something like CIDB. Offering fixed rate mortgages, Mr. Speaker, I think is something that will go a long way to helping, especially Caymanians who are starting out in life, just getting a small home for them and their family, and getting them on their way, without them having to go through the battles of rising interest rates, which we're all going to, as legislators, we're going to have to deal with that one soon, because it keeps coming. And the more it comes, the more people are going to end up in arrears and in problems. I know we can't control interest rates, but we need to find creative solutions to deal with the problems created by that. This is one solution that I think we should look at. As I said, I haven't done the research. I don't know all of the pros and cons, but to me it seems on the surface to be something that we should be exploring. Mr. Speaker, I know, as the Premier said, you know, when you hit retirement age, what could potentially happen? I also know what is happening to retirees. The cost of health insurance for someone who is now retired is astronomical. That is another area we have to tackle. In tackling these things, Mr. Speaker, I think we would probably be assisting people who are still paying mortgages. They might be paying less in one area and paying the same mortgage, but these are things that we have to look into. I know a number of retirees now who are not working and paying astronomical health insurance premiums. And unfortunately, as the Minister said, the Minister for Health said earlier, and unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, oftentimes the benefits that these individuals are receiving, the dollar value of the benefits outside of an emergency room visit is actually less than the premium they're paying every year. It's sad. As you get older, your health problems increase, Mr. Speaker. And you know, our retirees, we really, I think, have to take action now, because more and more people are retiring. Now, the issue we have in terms of pension, I think a lot of people misunderstood the recent changes to the pension law. In terms of pensionable age versus retirement age, a lot of people are still under the impression that they don't have to retire until 65. Unfortunately, they're learning that the hard way when their employer comes and says, sorry, you're going home now. You just turned 60. These individuals, Mr. Speaker, are still paying mortgages. So the problem is getting worse. It's getting worse, and as more people near 60, we're going to have to come up with solutions for this. I understand the rationale behind why the government can't support this, but we have to look at possibly some adjustment to where you can pay off for your arrears if it's under a certain amount, catch it before it hits 3 months as a one-off. That may be a solution rather than paying off the whole mortgage, because we need to give people a second chance. A lot of people have hit hard times. As I said, they've had to downgrade their salaries. They've taken lower paying jobs. They still have kids to take care of. They still have mouths to feed. And you can't do that without a home. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member from Georgetown Central for bringing this issue up. We may not all agree on the solution, but it's an issue. I'm glad we were able to discuss it here, ventilate it here, get the issues out. And collectively, I think we can solve the problem. But it's a start. So thank you for the opportunity to contribute, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that I am not likely to support tampering with people's pension. The Honorable Premier tried to give a little history on pensions, and I think I know a little bit about the history of pensions. I also know why we're where we are today. Because the same people that are capitalizing and profiteering on the poor people of this country in 5 or 6 pension plans is the same people who hijacked it in 1992 when I brought a pension plan here that was a national pension scheme that set up one fund, and they wouldn't allow me to get it past the second reading, had to be referred to a select committee, and they kicked me out of office in 1992. And they killed the plan. And what they brought back in 1992 was bad legislation when it was brought. It was a compromise that gave the private sector total control of people's pensions. And that is why we have all of this investment criteria that Cayman are getting nothing out of it. And the only people making money out of pensions in this country are the people who are administering the plans. And that is why we have so many of them. Because like the health insurance, if they wasn't making money out of it, they wouldn't be in it. And we know the PAC managed to unveil here a few weeks ago that the health insurance companies that tell us they're not making any money out of health insurance made $51.5 million profit in 1 year. But they say they're not making any money. Mr. Speaker, I didn't manufacture those numbers. Those numbers were produced by the government's own regulatory authority, the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, in the 2016 report that they are required to file audited accounts for. It will be very interesting to see a similar situation on the private sector schemes. And, Mr. Speaker, there are going to be very few people, very, very few people who will have money in their pension plan to this level that they will be able to help themselves with a mortgage. That is not the answer to the problem. The government must get busy and they must fix the mortgage problem. Me and the member for East End brought a motion here, I think it was Mr. Member for East End 2014, huh? I think it was 2014, asking for the government to look at introducing proper mortgage legislation. We were ridiculed by the government. The minister at the time came back here a couple of months later, tapping himself in the chest and glorifying himself that he had got the bankers to agree to ethics amongst themselves. They don't know they're taking away people's house. And Mr. Speaker, when you look at the smorgasbord of pension plans that are out there under the national pension legislation, which only does one thing. It requires everybody to have a pension plan. And you heard the member from Bordentown remind us that the regulatory authority set up by that legislation to manage it, of which every pensioner in the Cayman Islands contributed to annually, monthly, as part of his pension he paid in, hasn't filed a report into this parliament in over 10 years. Where is the regulatory authority? What are they doing? Mr. Speaker, we are at the point where the only thing that is going to provide the people of this country with a pension plan is a national pension legislation where the funds stay in the Cayman Islands, and it is a fully funded contribution plan. Not defined contribution, defined benefit. Where the person who is contributing to the pension plan knows what he is buying. And without getting into all the details, it's a simple formula. If you work from age 20 to 60, you work for 720 months. Right? Something like that. No, you have lived 720 months. You work for 480 months. Right? Your pension benefit is limited to a maximum of 2/3 of your pension salary. And each of those 480 payments that you make on a monthly basis buys that benefit. What the con job that the private sector did in this country in convincing everybody to go to defined contributions, because you can make so much. They're the ones that put in these people's minds that they can have access to this money all the time. It is your money. You will be in control of it. You're not paying for anybody else. Nobody else can have access to your money because it's a defined contribution. Let me tell you all, personal experience, not something that I made up. I worked for Deloitte and Touche for 6 years. I made the maximum contribution every month. When I retired from them, after that 6 years, the Chamber of Commerce pension plan had in my account $3,000 less than I'd actually paid in. No. This is not no nonsense story. This is facts. So I claimed my pension. The law says, now remember, Mr. Speaker, that I'm living on $60,000 a year. That's my lifestyle at that time. The law says the maximum I can get is $12,000 for the year. So I have to adjust my standard of living from $60,000 to $12,000. And you know how long my pension lasts? I had $42,000. Do the numbers. I should have got $12,000 for 3 years, and then the balance in the 4th year, right? Surprise, surprise. I got even less because they didn't take my $42,000 in pension and put it in a CD, so at least I couldn't lose any more money. By the time I got to claim for the 4th year, they had lost another $2,000. So that year, instead of getting $6,000, all out of $4,000. Pension done. This is what the people are paying. Now let's look at the Premier gave some numbers. The average and the member for Prospect said that the majority of the workers here are in the lower paying jobs, right? I think the average, the payment is, what is, Chris? About $24 a month, right? Majority of us are making less than that. No. I don't know what you're paying in. So let's say the person is making $200 a week. This week, they're working for Company A. So they belong to pension plan B, right? So they're paying $20 a week, $80 a month. They work for that company for 2 or 3 years. So they, excuse me. So they've paid in. So they work for 4 years, for $320. Right? Then they get laid off on that job, right? Because they found some foreigner that can work cheaper. So they tell them, we don't need you no more, we can't afford you. So they go work for Company B. Company B has a different pension plan. So they start contributing to a different pension plan. Again, not to bring tales out of school, but I've been married 10 years. My wife works in the private sector. She's been in 4 pension plans already. Right? She never changed the other one. They forced it. They changed it for her, right? No. Of course, again, one of the big selling points of this private sector organization here, we call it Chamber of Commerce, was portability. Want to remember that word? Want to remember that word in the 1990s? Oh, we need defined contributions because it's going to be portable. You will know what you have. You can track it yourself. You can move it. Try some move it, you bad. Now, you really think any Caymanian in that position will have any pension to pay off mortgage or anything else? What were we doing about it? Nothing. Nothing. And it's getting worse every day. We need to put our heads together. And the size of this country and the size of this population, we cannot fund 4 or 5 pension schemes. Most of it is going to get eaten up in audited accounts, management fees, investors' fees, all those kinds of stuff. Right. And your return, your fees are not based on whether you win or you lose. Right? This country is going to have to do both for pensions and health insurance. And again, Mr. Speaker, I've been around that health insurance thing a little while. My postgraduate thesis in 1977, not too many of me were born then, right? Was on national health insurance of the Cayman Islands. So I've been around a little while. We have a healthcare system here where we allow, by law, the private sector firms to cherry pick and profiteer on the poor people of this country. And when they get in trouble, they have to come. I met with the executive of the chamber a couple of months ago, because now they'll talk to me because I'm leader of the opposition, right? So one of the questions they asked me, "Oi, Ezra, what were you all doing about this government liability for civil servants on pension and health care?" I said, "We work on it. What are you doing but on a liability?" "Our liability? We don't have none." "No. Because after they get through profiteering on the pension plan and the health insurance plan, they send you to the government. And they're the same ones will tell us in here that we're not representing our people because we won't bail them out after they made all their profit on their backs for 20, 30 years, and then they retire them with nothing. Until we get, and we are prepared as a legislature to make the hard choices on health insurance and pension, where your health insurance can remain a benefit, a retirement benefit from the company that you gave your best working years to, and you stay in a pool with the young, healthy people. We're not doing anything for our country, our people. We come up with this brilliant scheme now. probably come from them, you know. That what we really need is a special insurance plan for people over 65. And I see here this morning, we asking Canadian consultants. Now, they know plenty about health insurance up there. That's a national health insurance country. That's who we getting for expertise. How do we manage to do this? Where is the competency in the civil service at the top that's supposed to be advising you people? Because the school children in China should know that it's not going to go to a country that has a national health insurance scheme to look for advice on private sector driven and provided health insurance schemes. And we have to do something about mortgage legislation. There are many things that the banks can do without taking away people's house. They can take equity in the property, especially for some of the cases that the member from Bordentown West talked about, where people, professional people, getting a little bit of trouble, and in 3 months, they're quick to grab the house because they got some friend who need to buy a house because they need the points for PR. So we got to find a house that we can seize, right? And we can call the right real estate person, and we can call the right evaluator, and we can get the house for a friend. I'm not looking at me so surprised for. I have a friend who the evaluator that came to evaluate his house for the bank bought it. But what are we doing? Nothing. Senior citizens should be able to avail themselves for what is becoming very popular in the United States, reverse mortgages to help with their income. Because at some point in time, the government has to get real and stop picking these numbers out of the air, 400 and 500 and 650 and 750. We have to determine what our senior citizens need in income to live a reasonable life and live in some comfort. And you add up what they're getting and you bring it up to that level, whether that turns out to be $1,500 or $2,000 or whatever. You all have a whole battery of statisticians and records in government. Get them to calculate it so we can make data-driven, factual decisions in this parliament. Because this kind of hit or miss can't work in this day and age. And Mr. Speaker, I know the difficulties they're having, you know. I've been up there. I've been up there, as the Premier likes to remind me, in ancient times. Prehistoric times. Yeah. But the problems were the same. The only difference then, they were smaller. So we could manage them, right? So, Mr. Speaker, the solution to the mortgage problem in the Cayman Islands is not tampering with the inadequate pension legislation that we have. We need to look at passing specific mortgage legislation. And we were told 2 months, half a year, August last year, that having withdrawn the motions that the opposition brought on it, the government was going to meet with banks and sort the problem out. Maybe that's why the member from Prospect thinks that the mortgage crisis is over. I'm glad it's over in Prospect. I tell you, plan problem north side. And then the rest of that. Where are the reports? How often has that group met? What are they doing? The member from Modern Town West talked about having pension fund here because it is really unrealistic in living in La La Land. If we expect that the banks are going to take money that somebody bring to their bank and deposit it for 1 year or 6 months or 3 months and lend it to a Caymanian for 20 years. But if we kept the pension money here, that money was long term. There's no reason why a young Caymanian at age 25 who's going to work and pay pension for a long time into a proper national pension scheme can't borrow that money in a commercial arrangement from a banking institution at 1% of what they're paying him about it. He's borrowing his own money. And we could say to the banks, look, here's $50 million out of this pension money, because it's big money. The only mistake I made in 1992 was I unveiled to the Chamber of Commerce and those bankers and lawyers and accountants in that room what the projected annual income from the pension plan was. And when I told them that, you could see the ears spinning out of the head. We got to get our access on that, and we got to get rid of Mr. Miller because he can prevent us from getting at that. And boy, they spent a lot of money to get rid of me. And they got at it, and they've been controlling it ever since. They're all intertwined. Don't tell me we don't have the intellectual capacity in this country to sit down and design a scheme where pension, health insurance, mortgages are all interlinked and one benefits from the other. No, we can't do that because then the business people wouldn't support us because they're doing well. They're doing well out of the system. They're making plenty of money. Their own records say the health insurance side of it alone made $51.5 million in the same year that the hospital bad debt went up by 60 million. You all see a connection? Huh? So you see the connection? If they don't pay the hospital, that's profit for them. Right? Our health insurance legislation say if the hospital don't present the bill in 6 months, the health insurance company don't have to pay. And I really believe that they're up there in that mess we got up there. But that board now being sent home, that they're sending out the bills on time. How you think their bad debt is going up every year? Even the financial secretary has said to them in PSC, it's in our report, if you budget $20 million in bad debt and you get $20 million, you write it off. You don't add it up. I got people in my constituency who getting billed today for bills that their health insurance company settled 10 years ago. Luckily, some of them senior citizens and them old seamen are, got to train you to keep a piece of paper to get a hand on. Right?
Yet they can't bill the insurance after 6 months.
Exactly. So, fellow parliamentarians, this is a serious problem. I beg you all, let's put our heads together. Let's solve these 3 problems that are destroying the lives of the people we represent. Mortgages, health insurance, and pensions. Because there's no other alternative. The pensioners see the little money there, and they know they can keep their house. So they want it. So they believe you should have access to it. They tell me, similarly, we talk about, man, that's my money. That's what they told me. Because we are not doing anything comprehensive about it. We can't solve the mortgage crisis unless we solve the health insurance crisis, unless we solve the pension crisis. We can't solve runaway cost of living. I mean, even and forgive me, Mr. Speaker, I'm not criticizing the governor, but even him telling me 2 days after he come here, he go to the supermarket and he can't understand how a box of Ritz biscuits that he pays 60 pence for in London is $5 in Cayman. You know? And that's probably the way they sent him back, because he was getting down to them things, you see. But anyway, that's for another debate another time. But Mr. Speaker, we as legislators, forget what side of the aisle we're on. Forget whether we're government or opposition. I really don't care who gets the credit. You, the government, you will get the credit. But let's work seriously on the problem and stop creating these silos because people see opportunities to make money. And we acquiesce to it, think that we're doing something good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does the mover wish to? The Honourable Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is no doubt that the issue and the issues that we are discussing today in this motion are very important and they're very emotive. As you can hear from the contributions by the members that have spoken thus far, when you talk about people's homes, saving your home, providing for yourself and your family in this way, obviously touches at the very heart of who we are as a people, as a proud people. And again, hearkening back to the days of seafarers, which many people in this chamber know far better than me, given my relative youth with respect to some of the more, shall we say, seasoned members in the chamber. But, Mr. Speaker, speaking from personal experience as it relates to my own family situation, I remember hearing the stories about when the men were at sea, they would send home their remittances to either their mother or their significant others, and it was called allotments. Thank you very much. See, again, being edified by those of us in this chamber who actually went to sea and who are very familiar with this process. So I'm sure you can anticipate where I'm going with this particular story. They created an environment where home ownership was possible, literally building the foundation brick by brick, row by row. And as we say, certainly living within the means, their means at the time. So it is no question or no doubt as to why this issue of mortgage foreclosures is something that seems to hit at the very heart of many people, especially those who may have the unfortunate situation to actually experience it. But, Mr. Speaker, I think there are many lessons to be learned in that very short illustration. I think, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to making sure that when we go to engage in any financial transactions, we are cognizant of the consequences of those transactions. And Mr. Speaker, I want to spend some time talking a little bit later in my contribution about more generally the issue of mortgages and the regime and what the government is actually doing about it. So to not disappoint the Leader of Opposition in his claim that nothing is being done, certainly want to help to elucidate members in this chamber as well as the listening public. But before I get to that, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak briefly about the issue immediately at hand, which is that of using pensions and the pensions regime in order to help to fund other activities that are not necessarily related to the purpose of pension. And Mr. Speaker, I think again, as legislators, we are elected to represent the interests of our people. We are elected to help to educate and elevate the interests of our people. I firmly believe that is a part of the responsibility that we have as legislators. And Mr. Speaker, on that front, I think each and every one of us have an obligation to help our people understand that when you know and you fought way back in the late 90s, when the Leader of the Opposition fought in the late 90s for the genesis, I guess, of what we have today with respect to a pension regime, that the purpose of pension is a fund which is a sum of money that is added during the employee's employment years and from which payments are drawn to support the person's retirement from work in the form of periodic payments. In other words, Mr. Speaker, I think it is incumbent that we help our people to understand that, yes, this money is money that is set aside today to help people live more comfortably, more independently in the years when they cannot provide for themselves either through retirement or other means. But even saying that, Mr. Speaker, what this government decided to do in the last administration, certainly as it relates to improving upon, and as the Premier said, there is still more work to be done, and that was always anticipated to be the case when we embarked upon some of the significant changes that we made to the national pensions law, dealing and governing the private sector pension regime. Some of the significant changes that were made specifically with the concerns, some of the concerns that are being expressed here today about when people fall on hard times as it relates to mortgage or housing or saving their homes. So again, Mr. Speaker, it's to remind the public that one of the significant changes made to the national pensions law that has now come into effect since 2016 or 2017, certainly it is currently in effect and it is available to those that have the ability to do so, and that is the additional voluntary contributions of your pensions is now accessible expressly for the important things in life, the important things like an education for yourself or your dependents, the important things like health care if you are in need of a procedure that may not necessarily be covered adequately by insurance or otherwise, you are able to access the information or access the funds in your additional voluntary contributions specifically for those purposes. Another reason to be able to access these additional voluntary contributions is specifically for housing and mortgage-related issues that is at the heart of what we are debating today. So, Mr. Speaker, the government has already seen the need to try to get creative in ensuring that the people of this country can use these savings. And the whole purpose of opening up the additional voluntary contribution scheme, which previous to the amendments that came into play in the last administration, was actually closed until retirement age. The reason these funds, and there is another reason which has slipped me at this stage, but there's 4 critical reasons why you can actually access these additional voluntary contributions now within your working age and not having to wait until retirement, is because we want to encourage people to save, to put beyond what is the mandatory minimum to save, but recognizing that we all at some point may fall on hard times. And so this money is no longer locked away until retirement. You can actually access these additional voluntary contributions today if you fall within these particular categories. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is just one example of some of the extensive amendments that were made to the bill, all with the purpose of strengthening the national pensions law. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to point out that when that law or when that bill was passed in these hallowed chambers, it received unanimous support of everyone that voted and who was here at the time. So certainly, Mr. Speaker, we may all have our views about what has yet to be done and what needs to be done and what should have been done. But, Mr. Speaker, the government of the day recognized that it was a significant step and move forward, and everyone, including members on the opposition bench at the time, supported it while they were in this chamber. So, Mr. Speaker, I concur with the Premier when he said more needs to be done, and it was always the intention that those changes were a part of what I call phase 1, and addressing issues related to the investment, restrictions, and otherwise should help to further strengthen the pension regime. But lest I digress too much into those details, Mr. Speaker, the main purpose, as I said, for rising at this occasion to make a contribution is to say that the government, we have heard the general concerns, the questions, and even suppositions made by the public and other members in these chambers as well with regards to the current mortgage framework in the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, I think it is fair to say that there appears to be a pervasive public perception in some quarters and among some people that the retail banks in the Cayman Islands act in a manner that is either unfair on the one hand, or some may even claim harmful to the general public of the Cayman Islands as it relates to their lending practices, especially as it pertains to mortgages. But, Mr. Speaker, as was expressed by the Leader of the Opposition himself, it is important as a government that we make factual, data-driven decisions. And we have seen the ramifications across the pond when a critical piece of legislation was amended, that being the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act in the House of Commons, when it is made purely on perception. And so, Mr. Speaker, certainly as Minister for Financial Services, and I would dare say speaking on behalf of the government, we agree with the position put forward by the Leader of Opposition about making sure that we proceed on a factual basis and getting as much information to be able to support whatever decision that needs to be taken with respect to the mortgage regime. And so, Mr. Speaker, also to answer a question that was posed about what have we done with respect to the commitments given to meet with the banks to discuss these issues, As I have indicated in, I think, answering a number of parliamentary questions that have come during this past year, I certainly want to reiterate, for the benefit of members in this chamber as well as the listening public, as Minister of Financial Services, I have met with each of the retail banks in the country. I have met with them collectively as a group under the umbrella of the Banking Association, as well as met with them individually to discuss some of these very issues, among others, that are of concern to the government and the general public. We have discussed issues with respect to mortgage and foreclosure practices, and I have taken the opportunity to try to get a better understanding of some of the legislation and the policies that underpin such practices in the Cayman Islands. And Mr. Speaker, as I indicated that I would during, I believe it was the November meeting of the House, or certainly, if not that, well, in Finance Committee, that on behalf of the government, I have requested that the Law Reform Commission, back in 2017, this request was made, to conduct a comprehensive legislative review of the mortgage framework in the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, this review is anticipated to be completed, and the government is hoping to receive draft proposals submitted by later this year. Now, Mr. Speaker, I also want to advise this House that just yesterday, I took the opportunity to impress upon the members of the Law Reform Commission. Some of them were actually here yesterday while we were delivering some of the government bills. And it just so happened that I had the opportunity to speak to the very gentleman who was charged with the responsibility of helping to coordinate and conduct this legislative review. So I took that opportunity to speak to him specifically and express to him the need to expedite as best as possible the work that the Law Reform Commission is carrying out in order to provide the government with this factual overview of what pertains from the legislative as well as current policies and practices. Again, to give us a good handle on whether or not the perception that may exist matches or mirrors the reality of the situation. And so, Mr. Speaker, as we know, over the past several years, there have been many discussions related to mortgages. These discussions vary in detail and topic, ranging from, in some cases, the actual type of product offered by the retail banks, be it a mortgage versus a demand loan, dealing with lending practices or lending capacity, and property valuations. Mr. Speaker, this is a complex area of law. And in some cases, I think just helping that general understanding, as I said, as elected officials, which I believe we're charged as a part of our responsibility in our efforts to not just advocate for our constituents, but represent them in a way that is faithful. It should be noted that in some of these discussions and conversations, terms such as demand loan, mortgage, or term loan, they may have been used interchangeably, albeit incorrectly or in the incorrect context. And in some cases, Mr. Speaker, what may be seen as improper use of the terms may have also nurtured this feeling or this belief in harmful practices in the jurisdiction. So, Mr. Speaker, in an effort to try to break it down in very simple terms as far as I can understand, to help to explain some of these considerations, it's important to note in general that a demand loan is normally a short-term loan that is repayable on demand by the lender. So in this sense, the lender can call the repayment at any time. A term loan, Mr. Speaker, is granted for a specific period of time with a fixed repayment schedule. Term loans are generally extended for a longer duration of time as well. And so, Mr. Speaker, a mortgage, depending on the terms, could take either the form of any of those previously mentioned loans that I've said, but the key difference is that the mortgage is secured by real estate property, and often in the Cayman Islands, this being a house. Again, Mr. Speaker, it is important to make clear that a loan, whether secured or unsecured, or a mortgage, is susceptible to the conditions of that contractual agreement, such as fees, interests, and others, and these are included in the contract. So importantly to note, these conditions, such as the interest may be fixed or it may be floating, each of which carries with it advantages and disadvantages. So, Mr. Speaker, I say all of that to say that when people enter into these contractual agreements, because that is exactly what it is a contractual agreement to borrow money to either, in this case, purchase a home, it is important for people to understand what they are getting themselves into, to understand the kind of conditions that are set and that are attached to each of these loans. And again, Mr. Speaker, a part of the mix of a mortgage in particular, because it is secured by real estate property, the question of valuations also comes into play as it relates to for home insurance purposes, and in the case of a foreclosure, for resale purposes, or even in the case of seeing what you qualify to actually get from the actual initial valuation of when the loan or the mortgage is given. And again, Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that the land survey law and the subsidiary regulation sets out the requirements to grant a license to the surveyor and the conditions by which the licensed surveyor must comply. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, the registered land law sets the parameters and conditions under which a charged property can be repossessed. So, Mr. Speaker, I take the time to talk about, in very general terms, some of the laws and some of the regulations and some of the legislative framework that governs mortgages, simply to demonstrate the complexity and the cross-ministerial nature of the legislative landscape governing mortgages in the Cayman Islands. And also, Mr. Speaker, as I said before, given, as we know, the law of unintended consequences can be oftentimes very unforgiving, and given the concerns that have been expressed by members on both sides of the aisle about making rash decisions and having the negative consequences that may not necessarily be intended, and one such consequence could be to rush to make legislative changes in a way that actually has a negative impact on people actually having access to credit in the first place. Those are some of the considerations that we certainly are aware of, and that is why we have taken the very reasoned, the very rational approach that I am glad to hear has been endorsed in this context, as in seeking to make factual and data-driven decisions. We have taken the approach to seek the review and the recommendations of the Law Reform Commission, who has the remit to look across the various pieces of legislation and the legislative frameworks in order to give us, again, an overview in detail of the mortgage framework in a manner that will help us to answer some of the questions and concerns raised, while also setting out recommendations to improve the jurisdiction's lending framework to the betterment of the entirety of the Cayman Islands, if in fact there are improvements to be made. So, Mr. Speaker, this government, and certainly I speak as Minister for Financial Services, I have taken a very active approach to trying to address these issues directly with the banks, but also in a way that ensures that the good governance and proper steering of these proposals and moving us forward to address what we know to be some concerns, especially for those who may be experiencing the hardship of having to go through the process of losing their home. This is not lost on us as a government, and we certainly have not been sitting down and doing nothing about it, as has been accused here today. But again, Mr. Speaker, we all recognize in this House, and it is far easier to talk about what needs to be done, what should be done, and make complaints about what isn't done, than it is to actually roll up your sleeves, get down to work, and actually try to find solutions about what could be done in a way that gets us to where we need to be, but cognizant and trying to mitigate any risks that may come from, as I said, the laws of unintended consequences. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I conclude my contribution to this debate, but I certainly, as I have been doing all along, will continue to keep this House apprised as and when we receive the report from the Law Reform Commission. And those of you in here that know me know that I will continue to advocate an expeditious process to be carried out by the Commission to help us to be able to address the reality of the situation and make whatever changes as may be necessary. Thank you.
The mover for his right of reply. Oh, I was just basically going from what had transpired earlier, but definitely the Honorable Minister for Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I certainly won't be too long, as the subject has been well ventilated this afternoon. But, Mr. Speaker, as the Premier said earlier, the mover of this motion is not wrong in anything that he said or what he's proposing, but there are some concerns in the way that it was proposed. Mr. Speaker, the motion itself, as we've heard from the Leader of the Opposition and others, is by no means the answer to the issue at hand. And Mr. Speaker, as Minister Rivers just perfectly verbalized the efforts being made by the government to address the issue on a factual and holistic basis. The government is certainly not sitting and not addressing the issue, but as Councillor Harris said, it is often a huge part of our discussions during our caucus. As the councillor also said, Mr. Speaker, we do feel that there is a demographic of our population who have been hardworking and very responsible in their budgets and in the carrying on of their lives, but for whatever reason have found themselves in a situation where they have fallen behind and could certainly positively benefit from access to funds in order to alleviate some of the stress, the pressures of having a mortgage looming over their heads and the possibilities of losing their home, their shelter, their fort, their place of comfort, and the place that they have worked so hard to call their own. So, Mr. Speaker, I believe, and after a brief canvass with my colleagues, that if the move of the motion, if the member from Georgetown Central were to consider amending his motion to a maximum of $50,000, that the government would certainly be in a much better position to consider the motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Other member? Any other member? Is there any other member wishing to speak? I therefore call on the mover for his right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to say thank you to everybody who has contributed to the motion, and I want to say thank you to, particularly to the members of opposition who got up and gave me their support in respect to this. I want to say thank you to the government, as within the last 24 hours, I have learned a lesson from the Honorable Premier in respect to the art of compromise. And I'm going to execute that maturity tonight and say simply, thank you very much, and I accept the offer that if the government would support it, going up to a maximum of $50,000 and the amendments on the motion suggested, I think that there will be some people who will be benefit from this. And rather than to lose the opportunity to help 1 or 2 or 3 or even 10 people, I'd rather take that than nothing at all. So that being said, I want to say thank you to the government and to the opposition in respect to their support to this motion. Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, and just in terms of procedure, we need a motion, a formal motion to amend the motion. So, Mr. Speaker, I am happy to do so with your permission, it's getting long, with your permission and obviously the approval of the member.
Honorable Premier, really, you only need the permission of the chair, and therefore that permission is given. I know what you're trying to do, sir. Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the resolved section of private members' motion number 12 of 2017-2018, entitled Increase in Mortgage Withdrawal for Paying Off a Mortgage, be amended in the third line by deleting the words up to the maximum of 100,000 Cayman Islands dollars and replacing it with up to the maximum of 50,000 Cayman Islands dollars.
The Honorable Premier has moved the amendment, and although it is not written, it's quite clean, quite clear what he's doing, and I have certainly accepted it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I thought that really that we had all said what we needed to say, but if members wants to speak, then this is their opportunity. Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, just to say briefly that the member from Georgetown Central has indicated his willingness to accept the amendment of the motion in the terms I have proposed, and the government is grateful to him for his agreement to compromise, which we think will be in the overall best interest of the people of this country. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker,
The amendment has been moved. And well, I thought that was a given, but perhaps not. Anyone else wish to speak? Any other member wishing to speak? Honorable member from Georgetown Central.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize for the up and down as still learning the procedures. I just want to say thank you to the Honorable Premier and his government and finding a middle ground in respect to this motion, and thank you and appreciate it.
Any other member wishing to speak? Honorable Premier wishing to add to it?
No, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The motion has therefore been amended. Honorable mover, you can move for your right of reply. As amended.
Mr. Speaker, nothing else but to say for a third time, this is an example of compromise that the good Premier suggested to me just yesterday. So it proves that you can learn a lot within 24 hours. So hopefully this is an indication of moving forward that we can put differences aside in the best interest of the people, and hopefully in the future some more of my emotions may have similar consideration. So thank you not only to the Premier but each and every member, because I know that I had the opportunity to experience something I haven't experienced so far, which is politics in motion, as people whisper and talk and beat in the back and all that. All of that was happening, and I felt a bit of a jitter in my stomach to say there was something happening that was positive. So it was good to experience that, and at least I know what it feels like to win for the first time in this Parliament to some degree. So that being said, to each of the other members who I know would have obviously had to give their blessings to that agreement, thank you, and to the Premier and his administration.
The question is that private members motion number 12, 2017-2018, which reads as follows. Be therefore resolved that the Cayman Islands government considers amending Section 52C of the National Pensions Law 2012 revision to allow the amount of withdrawal to be increased from $35,000 up to a maximum of $50,000 Cayman Islands dollars to pay off an existing mortgage and to carry out any other legislative changes that may be necessary to give effect to this policy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The motion has been passed. Honorable members, many of you are new and perhaps have never had the time, nor before you became members, nor at this time, or since you become members, to have checked facts that is often talked about in this House. But a little historical fact for honorable members. We got the motion passed for pensions in 1985 for a pension system for our people. In 1993, when as minister I tried to get pensions, there was nothing. People worked 40 to 50 years with nothing at the end when they were being sent home at age at least 70 or older. Other ministers since me have had to work in much the same parameters. However, the country did not support a social security system, nor did the vast majority of members back then. Dozens of actuaries, accountants, bankers, and other professionals of the day fought against any kind of pensions, much less the social security system. So we took what we could get back then so that we would get a start on something for our people. And if we didn't get the one that we have, as bad as it is being said it is, I don't know where there would be any kind of savings by those who need it most today. If the prognostications I'm hearing are fact, and there seems to be a plenty of talk, let's see what facts bring out about systems of pensions. The whole matter seems to have been said to have been for naught. But let me say, nothing from nothing leaves nothing. If we didn't have something, what would the talk be? I'm praying that we will get a better system. Don't know that the social security system, with the many in the world that has failed or is failing around the globe, can be the panacea to our pension needs. I thought, honorable members, that I should lay some facts on the table of this House so that one and all, for the records, will understand that pensions didn't just come so. It's been a hard fight for all ministers who have been involved with this matter, because as a parliament we can legislate, but if the public of the country don't accept it, of what good will it be? It has been said, you can make all the laws in the world, but if the people don't support it, there is no law. And so let's think about where we've come from, where we've gotten to, and how hard it has been for various ministers to have gotten this far, and that if we did not have what we have, there would be nothing to get $50,000 from. I hope that I'm not beat on the head, but as Speaker, I am prepared to take those licks. Speakers are not supposed to speak, and really I'm not speaking, I'm just repeating historical facts, explaining historical facts. Therefore, it's a good time to take the evening break, and we'll come back at 7 p.m. We'll adjourn the House, suspend the House till 7 p.m.